The social game in organizations is very different from the formal positional game, right? Hierarchy. That's what formal structure produces. It produces a power of hierarchy, while informal structure produces influence. You like me, so I can influence you. So those are two important structures. The problem with those two structures is that you cannot get work done in either of those structures. There must be a third structure, value creation structure, which creates another force, another power called reputation. And to understand value creation structure, there's a fundamental concept. It's the distinction between center and periphery. And the center serves the periphery so that the periphery can serve the market. Value creation structure is the only structure where the actual work can happen. When organizations become larger than 20, 30 people, they start differentiating between center and periphery, and the periphery must be in charge. Decentralization is paramount for survival, because if you do not place power in the hands of the periphery, then you have to rely on centralized steering against the market forces, and you will blow up the whole organization. If you do not want to hurt value creation, you cannot accentuate formal structure too much. Formal structure and value creation structure, they have an antagonistic relationship. They are like wolves. So if you steer through hierarchy and formal structure, you will hurt value creation, which must flow from the inside out, and it cannot stand hierarchical force. So these two structures in today's organizations are in constant conflict.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Boundaryless Conversations podcast. On this podcast we explore the future of business models, organizations, markets and society in our rapidly changing world. I'm joined today by my usual co-host, Shruti Prakash. Hello, Shruti.
Hello, everybody.
And today we are super thrilled to have with us Niels Pflaeging, internationally recognized management thinker, author, speaker, one of the leading voices challenging conventional, organizational design and management practices. He is the founder of the BetaCodex Network and partner at Red 42. Over the last 2 decades, you have been widely known for your work on complexity, decentralized organizations, and I would say, generally speaking, the transformation of management systems beyond command and control, which is, I think, something that makes us passionate on both sides. You have helped countless organizations around, rethinking their leadership, their coordination in complex environments. Yeah, I've also authored influential books like Organize for Complexity, the BetaCodex, and other books on certain management thinkers that are worth studying that you're going to tell us about in a few minutes. Hello, Niels. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks to you guys for inviting me. It's wonderful to be with you.
This season, I had so many people coming to the podcast from what I call my pantheon of inspirations, right? Because your work, especially on organizational physics, was really foundational for me, at least, to how I see organizations and platforms. And I remember mentioning your value creation structure slide in presentations from maybe 15 years ago or something like that.
It was very new then.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So we had this conversation on LinkedIn a few days ago talking about this exact. It was a very pioneering work that is still relevant, but people still misunderstand it. So what was your experience in the last more than a decade in talking about this, Niels, and why people are still do not grasp it entirely?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm old, so I've been in this business for 20 years, doing consulting and writing and speaking, but I do these 3 things. So I think most people specialize on one of these things. So the great speakers, public speakers, they only speak. And as they never have to do a real workshop with clients, or they do not do consulting projects, they are never seriously questioned.
Right.
Really. My work has always been very questioned. Everybody hated my work when I started doing Beyond Budgeting 20 years ago. Everybody hated it because they said, budgeting cannot be abolished. Everybody needs planning. Annual planning is very useful. And so when we in 2011 came up with the notion that organizations have 3 structures, not 2, not 1, but 3, everybody had doubts, or not everybody responded as you did, saying, it makes immediate sense. So let's talk about it and let's put value creation structure first. Few people had this insight right away. I think still most people struggle. At the time, not sure if you remember, around 15 years ago, there was a book by John Cotter, one of my heroes, who wrote a book about dual structure. So organizations supposedly have two structures. And I said, this is completely wrong. Sadly, you are a hero, John, but it's wrong. He's really a hero. I love his work. But that book, don't read it. Yes, organizations do not have two structures. In his book, he basically distinguishes two structures that also appear in organizational physics, which is formal structure and informal structure. I think today everybody understands that there is not just formal structure, there is also informal structure, who we like, who we dislike. Shruti, you are from which part of India? You are from India, supposedly, right?
Yeah, from the south of India, Tamil Nadu.
From the south of India. So who in India do you dislike most? From which parts of India?
Tough to answer.
But let's imagine that you are from Delhi. So you do not like people who are from...
Maybe if I had to pick, then maybe Delhi. Yeah, I don't like. Yeah.
Yes. I recently did a workshop in Austria, and it was in a rural region in Austria. And at some point, I imitated an accent from Vienna, which is the only Austrian accent that I know a little bit. So I imitated how Viennese people speak. And after the workshop, one of the guys, an older guy, he says, Niels, you shouldn't imitate the Viennese accent. Everybody here hates people from Vienna. And he was an Austrian, of course, right? And I said, like, but does it really matter who you hate? I just wanted to make fun, make a silly joke, I didn't mean I love the Viennese, not that I despise, nothing like that. It's just the only Austrian accent that I imitate, This is the way we are. We like other people, dislike other people for religions. Some of us are racists even, which is terrible. But we also, we might like people who went to the same school, the same university, who are in the same cult. I have a son who is he's a physicist. He studied physics. And he kind of looks down on everybody else, on biologists and on me, because I study. So we are like that, right? We like and dislike people. And sometimes seriously, sometimes, or it's very important, for example, when you work in a company to smoke. If you smoke, you meet other smokers, and while smoking, you talk. That's why it's also important to drink coffee with other people, drink tea with other people. It's always good to drink coffee and tea because you meet different tribes and form. That's informal structure. It's very powerful. Water cooler. I'm not sure about how this... In Italy, I suppose, informal contacts are very important, right? And over...
In general, yes, I would say Latin countries, but even Middle East, it's the same.
Exactly. It's everywhere like that, right? It's the most powerful structure. Everybody knows that. But what's really important is informal structure. It has nothing to do with hierarchical levels. It defeats hierarchical levels because it's all about sympathy, antipathy, and who we are close to, who we relate with, and so. And it's the informal game, the social game in organizations. It's very different from the formal positional game, right? Hierarchy. That's what formal structure produces. It produces a power of hierarchy, while informal structure produces influence. You like me, so I can influence you. And we do that all the time. So those are two important structures. And this is what many people today understand. Mr. Cotter started to understand it 15 years ago or so. The problem with those two structures is that you cannot get work done in either of those structures. That's not work. They don't describe how work works. Because just because I like Shruti and she likes me, or we dislike each other, that doesn't explain how we work. It makes work harder or more easier, but it doesn't describe how work gets done. Formal structure, I might be your guy's boss, but that doesn't explain explain either how the work works. So there must be a third structure. And this is why we created org physics, because we understood, Silke, Hermann and we understood 15 years ago that in order to truly understand how work works, how value creation works, we need to understand another structure, the third structure. And that's least understand. Why I'm talking to you about the two structures, formal structure and informal structures, is just to make you aware and everybody aware they are not as important as we think. They are very important. They both produce power. But the most important power to get shit done, as the Americans say, is value creation structure, which creates another force, another power called reputation. So in value creation structure, there's another. This is, for example, I respect John Cotter. He has a reputation of power over me because I respect his work. In every company, there are people who you turn to them when everything goes downhill. And then you say things like, oh, now we have to talk to Frank. The only person who can save us is Frank or Isabel. Yes? So now we have to turn to that person, people with mastery, and they are important players in the third structure, value creation structure. And to understand value creation structure, there's a fundamental concept that until today, most people do not understand or do not respect or do not want to understand. It's the distinction between center and periphery. Or better, between periphery and center, because the periphery is more important than the center. So organizations are like peaches. They have a periphery, like the peach meat, the juicy part, and they have the little pit inside, that's the center. And the center serves the periphery so that the periphery can serve the market. That's the most important new idea in org physics is that value creation structure is the only structure where the actual work can happen. Every organization has a value creation structure, and the value creation flows from the center to the periphery to the external market to clients ultimately. And every organization has this. And when organizations become larger than 20, 30 people, they start differentiating between center and periphery, and the periphery must be in charge. Decentralization is paramount for survival. Also in the age of AI, which we might discuss. Because if you do not place power in the hands of the periphery, then you have to rely on centralized steering against the market forces, and you will fuck up the whole organization, or you will blow up the whole organization. And if you do not want to hurt value creation, you cannot accentuate formal structure too much. Formal structure and value creation structure, they have an antagonistic relationship. They are like wolves. So if you steer through hierarchy and formal structure, you will hurt value creation, which must flow from the inside out, and it cannot stand hierarchical force. So these two structures in today's organizations are in constant conflict. Large organizations suffer from the conflict between the use of formal structure and the need for value creation. And that's in 120 minutes that I just needed to explain this is org physics. Every organization has three structures. They battle against each other. They must be balanced. Informal structure is important. Formal structure has a role to play in compliance. But to organize the work, we have to understand value creation structure, which means distinguishing between periphery and center. Was that a good enough explication?
Yeah, and when you speak about these three structures, right, there is, of course, the formal structure that, again, doesn't get work done. It's just about compliance and formal roles and gets in the way most of the time, let's say. Then there is the relationships, which, of course, exist all the time. I've been with plenty of customers which told me to get something done for me, I need to go and speak and ask favors and things like that, which is frustrating sometimes. And then there is the value creation structure. So one thing that I wanted to ask you is this value creation structure that you speak about in org physics is very much based on reputation. This guy or this girl or this woman knows how to get this done, or they have a clear reputation, clear capabilities, clear mastery. So it's some sort of structure that emerges from the daily practice, right? I'm asking you one thing, because in my experience, there is let's say, especially when you need to really scale such a system in a larger organization that you need to empower the periphery, you need some sort of structure to enable it. And for example, in our case, we always use this idea of microenterprises or nodes and contracts, and other teams have, for example, team topologies have come up with this idea of team structures or team archetypes. So how can you help, let's say, the value creation structure emerge in an organization by creating this enabling texture for the organization to reorganize around it?
Yes, there is an additional ingredient, a secret sauce, as you are saying, to value creation structure, and this is the notion of the team. A team is not a group. A group might be a team, but not all groups are teams. A team is always small. Yeah, it cannot be too large. That is one thing you referred to, I think, to the hierarchies with the micro enterprises. I think the hierarchies is not very kosher because they say their teams have 25 people, but the 25 people are never a team. It's one of the things I would like to understand in their understanding of organization. For us, in org physics, it's logical that a team can never be bigger than 80 people, 9 people, and then it gets very difficult. The one pizza rule, as some Americans call it, right? If a team becomes too big, it ceases to be a team. It becomes a group, and it becomes, hierarchical. Social density evaporates, and they become like bad, right? So a team is always small. A team has 4 people, 5 people, 6 people. With 7, it gets more difficult. With 8, quite difficult. With 15 people, impossible, right? So the secret sauce to decentralization and to value creation structure is have small teams in the periphery with their own clients, serving clients, and have teams in the center that serve the periphery as internal clients. So you have the periphery serving external clients, the center serving internal clients. And not the center steering the periphery, but the periphery steering the center. It's all it's counterintuitive. That's why we call it org physics, because it's real. I'm not talking about opinions here. Every organization works like that.
Essentially, my question, Niels, if you want to complete, it was more in the direction of asking you what kind of structures a company can create or enable to make the value creation structure emerge more clearly, because otherwise the idea of reputation and mastery may sound a bit fuzzy, let's say. So I was thinking to something like, micro enterprises or, team structures and things like that.
One of the things that I had to learn, I come from business administration background and I was a financial controller. So at a certain point, I had to learn a lot about social psychology and how work really works and organizational development and all this stuff, even psychology, by the way. And so one of the things I learned is the smallest unit of value creation is 3. 2 people and their connection. Yes, it's a myth that individuals create value or work alone. Nobody works alone. People always work in constellations. And that's hard for most people. That's hard to understand, especially in America, where people think that only the individual counts. Everything counts in large amounts. That sounds like a Depeche Mode song. Only the individual is everything. If you don't achieve, you're a loser. All that flies in the face of what value creation is really about, which is collaborating for each other, with each other, doing things together. So in every company, you need an accountant or somebody doing accounting. You need somebody approaching clients. You need somebody developing the product and so on. So you need a lot of roles, and it's never just one person. Even the greatest inventors of all times had somebody, and a lab assistant or their wives. The Curies had each other, for example. Marie Curie and her husband, they had each other, So nobody's alone. We work for each other, with each other, and the value creation structure, self-structure design, as we call it, reflects this. So that people work in constellations, these small teams, 4, 5, 6 people or so, but never 15, 25. And that's also something that many organizations, I work with tech companies a lot, software firms, and they struggle to understand that, no, if those developers think they are alone or work alone, that's just a beautiful illusion. They don't. What you have is just bad processes, bad functioning, bad interactions, bad value creation. Because when people think they are alone and do things mostly by themselves, you just end up throwing stuff over the silo walls. You have boundaries and so on. So the idea is not to have silos, not to have command and control functions or functionally divided organization, but functional integration. And once you think about that, people working with each other, for each other, you start thinking about, okay, what's the level of mastery that people have in their roles? What is their reputation? How good are they really? Are they just beginners? Are they amateurs? Or do they have mastery? Or are they maybe even virtuosos in what they do? So you call these ideas sophisticated. They're very basic. Are people more capable or less capable in what they're doing? Are they still apprentices, or are they masters already? Or are they even masters who can have other people as apprentices? So once you start thinking not in positional power, like in formal structure, but in roles and masteries, you get closer to thinking about the actual work. And that's what has been lost in command and control organizations, in Tayloristic or alpha organizations. Most of the time, we don't talk about mastery, we talk about positional power or who hates it, And that's not work. Even a committee is never about work. If these are practical examples. And any organization that has a committee doesn't support value creation structure. It reinforces formal structure. Because
my question was more about, of course, roles, of course, mastery, of course, influence, of course, reputation. But my question was more like, what kind of structures have you seen used by organizations to implement these at scale? So, for example, when you refer to teams, and I don't know if it was you, but maybe yes. Once somebody said you can only measure performance at the team level. You cannot measure it at the individual level, right? So the idea for me is, in your experience, what kind of recurring team structures or approaches to specialization, like, for example, in the higher model or in our approach, we know that there are micro enterprises, there are shared services. Team topologies have this idea of platform teams, stream-aligned teams. Is there something that connects well with the idea of value creation structures, this idea of team specialization?
The word you just used, you said micro enterprises, and what's the other thing?
Shared services, for example. Shared
services. Shared services is a word from the realm of command and control, of centralized steering. I wouldn't use it. My clients never use it. We distinguish between cells in the periphery and cells in the center. What Hire calls micro-enterprises are cells in the periphery that have clients, that have an external business, that sell stuff to external clients. That may produce services or products or both. And they might, now using my vocabulary, our vocabulary, cells in the periphery cannot do everything by themselves. They need some internal support, maybe for production purposes or accounting, or, for example, a general manager or CEO is usually not part of the periphery because she or he doesn't do anything that an external customer pays an invoice.
Yeah, sure. And in your experience, is this cells that you refer with the teams, right? Are these typically grouped in second-level structures in an organization, or they are very much okay? That was my question, essentially.
That would be the death of value creation structure. No secondary structure needed. You have the center and the periphery, and the center serves the periphery so that the periphery can serve the external market. There should be nothing else. And all cells in the periphery must have external clients. This is very hard for most people to wrap their heads around. All my clients have a pushback moment saying, this is impossible. It might work everywhere, but not here because this cannot be.
When you have processes or production that necessitates some kind of more structured work. Imagine, for example, that is something that cannot be achieved by one team relating to other teams, or maybe that's not the case. In your experience, is there any situation where maybe you need some longer structures that need more coordination, like in industry, for example, that are more, demand more planning or things like that?
Okay, the answer is no, and maybe a little bit of yes. So here's the thing. Sometimes you need more people to do certain value creation. So one team of 7 cannot do the things
exactly.
On their own.
That's my point.
You need 3 more people or 7 more people. So they can collaborate among themselves. Cells can share the business. They can say, we have this project or client or service, and we do it together. We invoice 50. We share the invoice 50-50, the income 50-50 between the cells. And we do this together. So collaboration between peripheral cells is an option. Also, there might be longer value creation chains in a company, but that's rare. In industry, that might happen.
That's very resonant with the work we are doing, right? And how do you manage the need for infrastructure? Like, for example, I guess that many teams can share an infrastructure. I'm thinking of, factory floor, or I'm thinking of a larger system, software system. How do you manage these larger investments?
Larger investments. Do you mean the investment decision, or how to use?
Yeah. Imagine, for example, we are all into cell-based organizations. Many cells at the periphery, cells at the center. Sometimes, I guess, especially when you have complex value creation processes, you may need an infrastructure used by many of those teams. So what is in your experience, the dynamic that you can use in this case?
There's one solution that we found in Bayer Bitterfeld, a company that's part of Bayer Group, famous for their DSO initiative, of course, yes. And Bayer Bitterfeld, you can imagine that they produce stuff like aspirin tablets and other drugs. They have like 500 people. So one of the questions there was, okay, if they have maybe 70 periphery cells or 60 periphery cells, and some of them use the same equipment, how to do that? And one of the solutions that they found was, with a little bit of help, was that some of the center cells are equipment owner cells. They own equipment that they rent, time slot wise, they rent it to the periphery cells, and the periphery cells pay for using the equipment. But the equipment is owned and maintained and so on by center cells. So the periphery cells, they produce on other cells, central cells, equipment. That was a brilliant idea because, these questions that you, Simone, that you just articulated, they come up in every organization. We have shared infrastructure, we have shared services, what to do? And there's always a solution, yeah? What I like to tell my clients is also, in every stupid command and control, functionally divided organization, even the worst bureaucratic company, there is secretly somewhere hidden, there's a value creation structure, and teams produce value from center to periphery to market. But it's hidden. You never see it in the org chart, which only depicts formal structure. You do not see it in the processes. The committees should be abolished. All the coordination, the steering, the budgeting should be eliminated. And then you should ask yourself, okay, how could we have periphery cells with few people, 5, 6, 7 people, that can serve their own clients? And then afterwards, we think what the center must do.
Yeah. But it works in spite of the rest, let's say, sometimes. But yeah, I think these were very important examples to give, that it makes it tangible that you can organize for value creation even if you have a complex or complicated system or organization.
It's important to distinguish between the practical theory of org physics, which tells us 3 structures. And if you do not work value creation structure consciously, then formal structure will work you. And the second is how to make value creation structure better by decentralizing power to the periphery, by having functioning cells in the periphery doing the business, and by having the center serve the periphery. So and cell structure design is an open source approach. Everybody can use it. Everybody can commercialize it. Every organization secretly has a structure like this, but usually it's not well understood. Some exceptions exist, like Toyota, Handelsbanken, Burzog. Higher, I'm in doubt, but yes, we might discuss it.
I think the word that's been, let's say, said the most is the peripheries word. So I sort of wanted to stem from that as well, right? So I would like to know how over the last few years, the idea of what organizational, let's say, physics looks like today, have these structures adapted or changed, or these peripheries been pushed after, how the network of coordination has sort of taken shape over the last few years, maybe with remote working, platform ecosystems, things like that. So how has that organizational physics evolved, and has this 3 phase of an organization, even though fundamentally it has remained the same, but have there been any offshoots that are sort of necessary to look at today, maybe extended beyond the firm-centric, let's say, approach as well, maybe, I don't know, external factors, politics, geography, and so on. So how has the physics changed, and maybe the peripheries as well being pushed a little bit further?
The question about org physics, has it changed, is that physics haven't changed, like real physics, org physics do not change, but our understanding changes, or the fashions or what we think about organizational physics change all the time. One example is until 10 years ago or so, it was fashionable to talk about self-organization and decentralization. Today, everybody talks about leaders and leadership, which is very much command and control and managerial and very much hierarchical thinking behind it. Authoritarian, I like to call it even. So there are ways, fashions of how to think about organizations. But the reality still is that value creation can only be created from center to periphery to market. That will never change. It's eternal. But what I think isn't very helpful is that there have been a lot of fads in recent years. To give an example, sociocracy, holacracy, which is nothing else than matrix structures reloaded, or even the so-called Spotify model. That was nothing else than matrix structures. Terrible concept of having many layers, many pyramids, command and control pyramids stacked on each other. And these fads, I think, they stand in the way of advancement. Yeah. So bureaucracy is very strong. There are many fetish ideas that are ultimately hierarchical and authoritarian. So I'm a little worried about the state of the organizational world today. Just like many countries, authoritarianism is on the rise. I see that in organizations, the rise of democratic, decentralized organizing is by no means assured. Not sure how you see that, Shruti. But command and control is not easy to kill. It's like a dragon with many heads. But org physics demands decentralization. That's a fact, because when markets turn complex, you need to decentralize decision making and power to the periphery. There's no way around that, and too many organizations still ignore that. So that worries me today.
We have also been big proponents of decentralization and cell-based and reputation-based systems. And sometimes when I think about some of the models that have emerged that push for decentralization, by the way, they embed this idea of flow, for example, or this idea of performance, right? So one thing that I sometimes miss is the idea of accountability. So as you decentralize, the point that I wanted to make is that as you decentralize the organization, you cannot really have the same idea of organization but decentralized, right? It changes what you do. It changes the dynamic of people choosing what to do, because they are not just executing someone else plan in a decentralized way. They're actually building a decentralized organization. So what is your take on accountability? Who takes decisions? Who bears the consequences? How do you manage resources, like salary and things like that?
There is a lot of confusion in organizations about what this shift of power to what decentralization might entail. And just to remember, in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, we talked a lot about delegation, which means bosses give some power to their underlings, but they make them accountable but not responsible, really. So it's kind of a fetish thing, a fraudulent thing. And delegation poker is still a thing. Some organizations still talk about delegation as if it were a solution, which it is not. Delegation is a lazy way of thinking about bosses being good bosses, But we should have much less bosses and much more responsible teams. It's exactly what you say, Simon. Accountability. We must combine accountability, responsibility, and the liberty to decide in periphery cells. That's the idea of what at higher. They call micro enterprises, what we call periphery cells or mini enterprises, So decentralization means the periphery cell is the company. One of our clients, Pratke, they have just 8 periphery cells, but every client knows that their periphery cell will solve every problem. There's no way around it. That team, that periphery cell, will do the work. So you don't need bosses, you don't need functions. That team will do it for them. And every client knows, this is my team, this is my periphery. This is, for me, the company. This is Pratke. And this notion that the periphery cells are in charge, that is not very, it hasn't become popular enough yet, right? Most organizations still struggle. Should we decentralize? Are people smart enough? Do they have the maturity? All that is bullshit, right? The people today have the mastery, and in command and control, we just cripple mastery or the development of learning, growth, and mastery, and so on. And we need to decentralize to create the conditions for people to acquire more mastery, to be more responsible, to be more mature, to act more responsibly. So our structures are the problem, not people. And that's the most basic insight that Douglas McGregor talked about 60, 70 years ago.
One of the things that I keep hearing is, again, this shortage of trust in the people in the periphery of the organization, even if ideally the leadership of the organization accepts the idea that, of course, if people take more responsibility, they have to run their own micro businesses, they need to have much more skin in the game in what they do, and so on. They logically understand it. They somehow wholeheartedly want this to happen. But still, many times I see them bouncing back to control because they don't trust their people. So the easy answer would be you have to trust your people. But at some point, it's true that people need skills, they need support. How do you actually build really entrepreneurial teams? What is the kind of motion that an organization can what kind of energy or support can an organization give to the cells, the periphery cells, so that they are really able to do the job of the periphery cell, which is, again, create value in touch with the customer?
It's a tough thing that you are. The question is about tough topic because it's an exercise in logic that needs to be done. I've been doing this consulting work for 23 years or so, and with every client I had to go through this logical exercise. So if you have 500 people, the question that I ask the CEO or general manager is, do you really think you are doing the whole work here? No, of course not, right? Other people are doing the work. Okay. Do you think you can steer and control everybody's work? No, of course I do not do that. Do you live in the illusion that you can steer or control the work and control everybody's actions? No, of course not. So why then do you have the whole steering mechanisms like budgeting and fixed targets and bonuses and all the nonsense, the committees, if you do not believe that centralized steering can work or should work? I always tell my clients, look, you have a really terribly performing command and control organization because of most organizations are terribly performing. We are fooling ourselves that everything is okay, but most organizations perform very badly because of command and control and steering and centralization. People are unsatisfied, there are all kinds of bad performance, not just too little profit, but an incapability of recruiting, an incapability of growing the business, an incapability of, developing people. So there are lots of ways how we stifle performance, right? So I always ask, do you really believe in those illusions? And my clients always say, no, by logic, I don't believe that I can steer the organization. And then I ask them, why do you do it? Why do you not get rid of all that overhead, all those middle management layers as well? Let people return to value creation, instead of having committees and middle management, all these meetings. They are shallow exercises in disbelief and mistrust and a lack of confidence in human nature, really. So even a bonus system with all the incentives and targets and so on, every budget is an expression of distrust in people, of lack of confidence in our people. And I always tell my clients, look, you have such an ineffective organization, so much command and control, so much silos, so much bureaucracy, so many barriers to performance. Still, the company survives and makes some profit. Usually my clients have some profit. Yeah. So people are capable enough to make your organization that sucks perform reasonably well. Imagine you could liberate people to take responsibility, to accept authority and let them do the fucking works. And then you could save so much money. So we go through these exercises of reasoning that you just, Simone, you started doing it, impersonating it in a way. And that's necessary in every organization to wrap your head around, okay, my people cannot be so dumb, otherwise the company would already be bankrupt. Yeah, my people cannot be the problem, but if our structures are a problem, then I, as a CEO or general manager, I am creating the problem, ultimately. And the best people run away because nobody wants to work in command and control bureaucracies. So everyone, your clients as well, I think, will have to go through that exercise. To understand decentralization, you must go through the exercise of questioning, why is everything so messed up? And what would a better structure do to people? Would people then maybe shout out, oh my God, I'm underqualified? That's great. If they do that, that's great. If you see that some people do not have qualification, you can fire some people. But it's better to fire some people than to let the best people run away from the command and control prison. I have learned that decentralization is not an easy sell. People, managers especially, must wrap their heads around it. And it's not trivial. They have to think it through. Why is it better to decentralize? Why is democracy better than fascism or Stalinism or authoritarianism? People need to educate themselves to think it through in our societies as well. Why democracy? Democracy seems so dark, so bad, right? So inefficient. Still, it's much better than authoritarianism or dictatorship. And this is the reflection we need in organizations. Shruti, you agree with me? That's good.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think I was just thinking about first, who does this thinking and where does this, let's say, learning stem from? Why is there a reason, therefore, that we are somewhere still stuck in maybe not traditional models, maybe traditional is not the right word, but maybe systems that don't encourage, let's say, societal or social thinking and purely encourage, let's say, managerial, I guess, structural thinking. So how does that transition happen in which case? And also, are there, existing, let's say, popular frameworks like, let's say, Agile, Kanbans, Scrum, etc. So they've also made leaders think in a certain way, in a certain direction, boxed managerial thinking to a certain way of thinking and to the people who think that. So how do we, let's say, democratize that thinking a little bit? And are there new frameworks or new aspects in frameworks that we need to introduce that therein make, the structural problem of coordination a lot easier? I know you speak about, for example, time as one of the, let's say, aspects that was not considered closely enough when Kanban, Scrum, etc. were developed. So are there more on that first, and also any other, let's say, metrics that we should also look into in these lines?
Time orientation is highly underestimated, right? Few companies like Toyota have figured it out. We still haven't spread time orientation in industry. Lean is really just a shadow of itself, and agile, I think, because that is my point. I will talk about a few books about time orientation in a moment, but the most misunderstood resource in organizations is time. We should make time the boss instead of having people bossing around people. Creating actual flow of value creation is one of the biggest secrets. And last year, a colleague of mine, a client of mine, we created a concept called time-oriented software development that is much more powerful than sprints, having sprints and scrum masters and so on. It's something that really works, and I invite people to take a look at it. Yeah. So that combined with decentralization, I think, is the secret to successful organizing. And Shruti, you asked about structures that help.
Yes.
And my answer, if I might answer with the opposed, it's not really an answer. I think we shouldn't add structures. I think the time is here to do organizational hygiene, to eliminate things, eliminate committees, eliminate functional silos, eliminate the sales department and let all cells do sales for themselves, eliminate powerful product managers, eliminate people in the center that have power and that steal, eliminate bonus systems, fixed targets, budgets, centralized allocations, cost management. There's a lot of steering. It costs a lot of time and adds nothing. It's called waste, really. The answer to your question, Shruti, about what structures do we need is much less. We need to eliminate rules, travel policies, etc. Useless rules, bureaucratic process, centralized steering to unleash power in the periphery. I hope that's an answer that makes sense. And then time is a big topic that we might come to in a moment.
Yeah, it really helps. I think the answer sort of lies in addressing complex systems with simplicity. I think that's where I'm going to sort of take it as well. And yeah, I think for our next session, we definitely have a lot to talk about. I think time-oriented software development plus decentralization, that in itself is such a large topic. I think we could, look into. But yeah, thank you so much, Niels, firstly, for this engaging podcast. I think we have a lot to learn and listen to. But before we end the podcast, we have a section called as the Breadcrumbs, where we ask our guests to share some, books or podcasts that they sort of take inspiration from. So anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
How many can I share? I think I have eight breadcrumbs. Okay, here's a book I'm reading right now. I read a lot of business books. I have a huge library of business books. This is the one I'm currently reading. This is old, 30 years old. Shigeo Shingo. Have you heard of the author? Shigeo Shingo? No? He's a Japanese guy. passed away in the 1990s, I think. And he's one of the creators of the Toyota production system. The book is called Non-Stock Production, the Shingo System for Continuous Improvement. Shigeo Shingo. And he wrote 20 books about lean and continuous improvement in the Toyota production system. Amazing author. I think this is super fun. And then about time, we need to talk about time, right? So this is the book about time that everybody should read. It's called 10 Thoughts About Time by a physicist from Sweden, Bodil Jonsson. 10 Thoughts About Time. It's a book of essays, beautiful. It's like lyricism about organizing and time. Everybody should read this book. And then there's somebody I did a podcast session with, Ellen Bludorn wrote this book in 2002 or 2004, I think. The Human Organization of Time. It's one of the best business books I've ever read. It's really a wonderful piece of writing about time and organizing. And then there are some things that I wrote that came up in the conversation. Cell structure design. How about this? We talked about cell structure design. There are 2 freely downloadable white papers. I have the print versions here. Cell structure design patterns, first paper, and then the second. Everybody can download them. So if you and your listeners want to learn more about cell structure design, those are good sources. This is also for free download. Slave to the Rhythm. Adopt time-oriented work systems now. This is a paper I wrote last year. The other ones as well. This is a paper I wrote last year to help people compare the Toyota production systems with other great time-oriented organizing concepts, like response manufacturing, or the Weichselbaum system. And this is another recommendation I have to make. It's really two recommendations. One is, what would Ernst Weichselbaum do? It's the first book by this guy in English that I edited, and it came out 1 month ago. What would Ernst Weichselbaum do? Ernst Weichselbaum is like the greatest practitioner philosopher of time orientation in the world, together with Taiichi Ohno, who I also edited a book about. So if you want to learn about time orientation and flow organizing and decentralization, these authors are a must. Taiichi Ohno, his quotes are in this book, What Would Ohno-san Do? And Ernst Weichselbaum. Sadly, he's Austrian. He was an Austrian. He passed away a year and a half ago. And his book in German was never published in English so far. So this is what you can get now. I think this is the most profound, the wittiest, most fun, most exciting book on organizing that's available in the marketplace now. So you have to read it. Yeah, instant classic. Highly recommend it. What would Ernst Weichselbaum do, and what would Taiichi Ohno do? So that's it. And if you have time, read my book Organize for Complexity, which covers the details.
A classic.
A classic, 6th edition, exactly.
It was great to have you on the podcast. Your work has been so influential, so important. Your passion can be felt to the screen, to be honest. And we should be really thankful for people like you that dedicate their life to this practice of organizational development and design with all the passion that you have been putting into this for more than almost 2 decades now. So thank you so much for your work. Thank you for your time today. I hope you also enjoyed some of our questions.
Totally.
And Shruti, thank you so much for your time as well, for your questions. I hope you also enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Niels. Thanks, Simone. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And of course, for our listeners, you go to our website, boundaries.io/resources/podcast. You will find this interview with all the breadcrumbs that Niels have shared. And of course, until we speak again, remember to think boundaryless.